Ruha Benjamin. Dr. Benjamin is an associate professor at the Department of African Studies at Princeton. Dr. Ruha Benjamin, welcome.
Thank you. Hear me okay? Just nod.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, I'm going to share my screen as well. You might want to toggle with your video feed so that it doesn't cut into the slides. All right, so thank you so much, Russell. That was amazing how much you packed into that short a bit of time. Thanks, Ken and Amber, for organizing, and your entire team, and for inviting me to participate. So I'm going to begin with saying kind of the obvious, which is that there are two sort of dominant stories that we currently tell about technology, that it's either going to slay us or save us. We can either talk about all the jobs being taken, or Hollywood loves this dystopian version because it sells tickets. The Silicon Valley loves the utopian version because it sells gadgets. Both are flawed. They seem on the surface to be opposites, but they share an underlying logic that technology is in the driver's seat, harming or helping us. But the humans behind the screen are shape technology. Though at the moment, only a narrow slice of humanity is doing that shaping, as Russell's presentation pointed to. And so what I'd like us to consider is what it means for more people to participate in imagining and building the digital and physical world we currently inhabit, whose values are at work. Consider a recent experience I had being a nosy sociologist walking by two men in Newark International Airport, when I overheard one say to the other, "I just want someone I can push around, ... I didn't stick around to hear how the sentence would end, because I could imagine all kinds of endings. It could be in the context of looking through resumes, deciding who to hire or fire. I just want someone to push around at work. Or in the context of dating or marriage, I just want someone I can push around in my personal life. The desire to exercise power over others is the dominant mode of power that's been given new license to assert itself, a kind of power that requires others to be subordinate. At the time, I was traveling to speak with students at Harvey Mudd College about issues of technology and power. And so when I overheard that conversation, I couldn't help but think of this advertisement from a 1957 Mechanics Illustrated magazine. "The robots are coming, and when they do, you'll command a host of push-button servants." And then it says, "In 1863, Abe Lincoln freed the slaves, but by 1965, slavery will be back. We'll all have personal slaves again. Don't be alarmed. We mean robot slaves." So much going on in this one little paragraph that we could talk about it for an hour, but for the sake of time, there's just two things I want to point out. The first is just to take note of the date, 1957, a time when those who were pushed around in the domestic sphere, wives, domestic servants, could no longer be counted on in the same way to, quote, dress you, comb your hair, and serve you meals in a jiffy. Hence the desire to replace free and cheap labor in the home with push-button servants. The fact is, no technology is preordained, but rather the broader context makes some inventions appear inevitable and desirable. Perhaps even more telling is that we will all have personal slaves again. That one little word tells us something about the targeted audience of this ad, certainly not those who are the descendants of people who were enslaved the first time. The imagined user is gendered, raced, and classed without gender, race, or class ever being mentioned. Code words, in this case, encode these interlocking systems of inequality as part of the design process. Precisely by ignoring social reality, tech designers and adopters will almost certainly reproduce it. It was true in 1957, and it's true today. So with that, I'm going to offer three takeaways for the presentation. The first is that racism is productive, not in the sense of being good, but in the literal capacity of racism to produce things of value to some, even as it wreaks havoc on others. Many of us are still taught to think of racism as an aberration, a glitch, an accident, an isolated incident, a bad apple in the backwoods and outdated, rather than as innovative, systemic, diffuse, an attached incident, the entire orchard, in the ivory tower, forward-looking, productive, even viral. In sociology, my field, we often say race is socially constructed, but we fail to state the corollary that racism constructs. Secondly, I'd like us to think about the way that race and technology shape one another, because more and more people are accustomed to thinking about the ethical and social impacts of technology, as when we talk about screen time and addiction. But this is only half of the story. Social norms, values, structures, all exist prior to any given tech development. So it's not simply the impact of technology that we need to be concerned about, but the social inputs that make some inventions appear inevitable and desirable. Which leads to a third provocation, that imagination is a contested field of action, not an ephemeral afterthought that we have the luxury to dismiss or romanticize. It's a battleground, a resource, an input and output of technology and social order. In fact, we should acknowledge that most people are forced to live inside someone else's imagination. And we have to come to grips with the fact that the nightmares that many people are forced to endure are the underside of elite fantasies about efficiency, profit, safety, and social control. Racism, among other axes of domination, helps to produce this fragmented imagination, misery for some, monopoly for others. This means that for those of us who want to construct a different social reality, one that's grounded in justice and joy, we can't only critique the underside, all that's going wrong, we also have to wrestle with the deep investments, the desire even that many people have for social domination. I just want someone I can push around. So with that trailer, let's turn to some specifics. A relatively new app called Citizen, which will send you real-time crime alerts based on a curated selection of 911 calls. It also offers a way for users to report, live stream, and comment on purported crimes via the app. And it'll show you incidents as red dots on a map so you can avoid supposedly dangerous neighborhoods. Now, some of you are already thinking, what could possibly go wrong in the age of barbecue Becky's calling the police on Black people, cooking, walking, breathing out of place? It turns out that even a Stanford-educated environmental scientist living in the Bay Area, pictured here, is an ambassador of the carceral state, calling the police on Black people having a cookout at Lake Merritt. It's worth noting too that the app Citizen was originally called the less chill name Vigilante. And in its rebranding, it also moved away from encouraging people to stop crime, but rather now simply to avoid it. What's most important to our discussion, I think, is that Citizen and other tech fixes for social problems aren't simply about technology's impact, but also about how racial norms and values shape what tools are imagined necessary in the first place. So these issues are what I take up in two new books. The first one examining the interplay of race, automation, and machine bias as an extension of older forms of racial domination. And the second is an edited volume on the carceral dimensions of technology across a wide range of social arenas, from more traditional sites like policing and prisons to less obvious contexts like the retail industry and digital service economy. Taken together, they examine the duplicity of tech fixes, purported solutions that nevertheless reinforce and even deepen existing hierarchies. So this combination of coded bias and imagined objectivity is what I term the new Jim Code, innovation that enables social containment while appearing fairer than discriminatory practices of a previous era. This riff off of Michelle Alexander's analysis in the new Jim Crow considers how the reproduction of racist forms of social control and successive institutional forms entails a crucial socio-technical component that not only hides the nature of domination, but allows it to penetrate every facet of our social lives under the guise of progress. So a quick example of the new Jim Code that's come to light in the last few months. Racial bias in a medical algorithm favors white patients over sicker Black patients, reports a new study by Obermeyer and colleagues, in which the researchers were actually able to look inside the black box of algorithm design, which is usually not possible with proprietary systems. What's especially important to note is that the algorithm does not explicitly take note of race. That is to say, it is race neutral. By using cost to predict healthcare need, this digital triaging system unwittingly reproduces racial disparities because on average, Black people incur fewer costs for a variety of reasons. And in my review of the study by Obermeyer and colleagues, both of which you can download from Science or the research tab of my website, I argue that indifference to social reality on the part of tech designers and adopters can be even more harmful than malicious intent. In the case of this widely used healthcare algorithm affecting millions of people, more than double the number of Black patients would have been enrolled in programs designed to help them stay out of the hospital had it actually been based on need rather than cost. Race neutrality, it turns out, can be a deadly force. In fact, this issue has come up in the last few weeks in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, because according to many protocols, those who are healthier and fitter are given higher priority when it comes to receiving scarce resources like ventilators. But who tends to be healthier and fitter in the first place? And more importantly, why? As Dr. Hannah McLean explains, if we strictly adhere to the Save Most Lives principle, we will be treating more white people, more men, more wealthy people. Black people are dying in record numbers from COVID-19, so this ethical oversight may already be playing out, she says. We can't say that we aren't discriminating based on race or ability to pay while algorithmically prioritizing the most likely to survive. So then as we think about how anti-Blackness and ableism gets encoded in and exercised through automated systems, I consider 4 conceptual offspring or dimensions to the new Jim Code that fall along a kind of spectrum, from the most obvious engineered inequity to the most insidious techno-benevolence. But I can't get into these in depth right now. For the sake of time, I'll just briefly sketch the last 2. Coded exposure names the tension between ongoing surveillance of racialized populations and calls for digital recognition and inclusion, the desire to literally be seen by technology. What I'd like to underscore is that it's not only in the process of being out of sight, but also in the danger of being too centered that racialized groups are made vulnerable. So that being seen is not simply positive recognition, but can be a form of unwanted attention, an issue that's going to take on added dimensions with the pandemic, with the use of apps and drones to track and control people and infections. Techno-benevolence names those designs that claim to address bias of various sorts, but may still manage to reproduce or deepen discrimination, in part because of the narrow way in which fairness is defined and operationalized. Take, for example, new AI techniques for vetting job applicants. A company called HireVue aims to, quote, reduce unconscious bias and promote diversity in the workplace by using an AI-powered program that analyzes recorded interviews of prospective employees. It uses thousands of data points, including verbal and nonverbal cues like facial expression, posture, and vocal tone, and then compares job seeker scores to those of existing top-performing employees to decide who to flag as a desirable hire and who to reject. The sheer size of many applicant pools and the amount of time and money that companies pour into recruitment is astronomical. So companies like HireVue step into the mix and narrow the eligible pool at a fraction of the time and cost, and over 700 companies globally, from Goldman Sachs to Vodafone, have signed on. According to HireVue, there's a lot that a human interviewer misses that AI can keep track of to make, quote, data-driven talent decisions. After all, the problem of employment discrimination is widespread and well documented. So the logic goes, wouldn't this be even more reason to outsource decisions to AI? Well, a study by a Princeton team of computer scientists examined whether a popular algorithm trained on human writing online exhibited the same racially biased tendencies that psychologists have documented among humans. In particular, they found that the algorithm associated white-sounding names with pleasant words and black-sounding names with unpleasant ones, which builds on a classic audit study that was done in the early 2000s that found the same pattern in old-school resume evaluations. So too with gender-coded words and names, as Amazon learned a few years ago when its own hiring algorithm was found discriminating against women. Nevertheless, it should be clear why technical fixes that claim to bypass human biases are so desirable. If only there was a way to slay centuries of racist and sexist demons with a social justice bot. Beyond desirable, more like magical. Magical for employers, perhaps looking to streamline the grueling work of recruitment, but a curse for many job seekers. As this headline puts it, your next interview could be with a racist robot, bringing us back to that problem space we started with. Though it's worth noting, some job seekers are already developing ways to subvert the system by trading answers to employers' tests and creating fake applications as informal audits of their own. In fact, one HR employee for a major company recommends slipping the words Oxford or Cambridge into your CV in invisible white text to pass the automated screening. In terms of a more collective response, a federation of European trade unions called UNI Global has developed a charter of digital rights for workers, touching on automated and AI-based decisions to be included in bargaining agreements. Another development that gives me energy and optimism amidst the daily barrage of depressing headlines is that tech workers themselves have increasingly been speaking out against the most egregious forms of corporate collusion with state-sanctioned racism. For example, thousands of Google employees condemned the company's collaboration on a Pentagon program that uses AI to make drone strikes more effective. And a growing number of Microsoft employees are opposed to the company's ICE contract, saying that, quote, as the people who build the technologies that Microsoft profits from, we refuse to be complicit. And as this article published by Science for the People reminds us, contrary to popular narratives, organizing among technical workers has a vibrant history, including engineers and technicians in the 60s and 70s who fought professionalism, individualism, and reformism to contribute to radical labor organizing. The current tech workers movement, which includes students across our many institutions, can draw from past organizers' experiences in learning to navigate the contradictions and complexities of organizing in tech today, which includes building solidarity across class and race. In terms of civil society, initiatives like Data for Black Lives and the Detroit Community Tech Project offer an even more far-reaching approach. The former works more at the policy level, and the latter develops and research and supports grassroots networks doing data justice research, including hosting what they call discotheques, which stands for Discovering Technology, which are these multimedia mobile neighborhood workshop fairs that can be adopted in other locales. And if you go to the resources tab of my personal website, you'll find a much longer list of organizations and initiatives to plug into. Finally, when it comes to rethinking STEM education as a ground zero for reimagining and the relationship between technology and society, there are a number of initiatives underway. I'll just mention this one very concrete resource, which you can download for free, called the Advancing Racial Literacy in Tech Handbook, developed by some wonderful colleagues at the Data and Society Research Institute. The aim of this is threefold: to develop an intellectual understanding of how structural racism operates in algorithms, social media platforms, and technologies not yet developed; an emotional intelligence concerning how to resolve racially stressful situations within organizations; and a commitment to take action to reduce harms to communities of color. To that end, the late legal and critical race scholar Derek A. Bell encouraged a radical assessment of reality through creative methods and racial reversals, insisting that to see things as they really are, you must imagine them for what they might be, which is one of many reasons I'm convinced that the arts and humanities have a huge role to play in this movement. And so one of my favorite examples of what we might think of as a Bellian racial reversal is this Parity Project that begins by subverting the anti-Black logics embedded in new high-tech approaches to crime prevention. Instead of using predictive policing techniques to forecast street crime, the white-collar early warning system flips the script by creating a heat map that flags city blocks where financial crimes are likely to occur. The system not only brings the hidden but no less deadly crimes of capitalism into view, but includes an app that alerts users when they've entered high-risk areas to encourage, quote, citizen policing and awareness. Taking it one step further, the development team is working on a facial recognition program to flag likely perpetrators. And the training set used to design the algorithm includes the profile photos of 7,000 corporate executives downloaded from LinkedIn. Not surprisingly, the average face of a criminal is white and male. To be sure, creative exercises like this are only comical when we ignore that all of its features are drawn directly from actually existing proposals and practices in the real world, including the use of facial images to predict criminality. By deliberately and inventively upsetting the status quo in this manner, analysts can better understand and expose the many forms of discrimination enabled in, embedded in technology. So here's my final proposition. If it is the case that inequity and injustice are woven into the very fabric of our society, then each twist, coil, and code is a chance for us to weave new patterns, practices, and politics. The vastness of the problem will be its undoing once we accept that we are pattern makers. The decision is ours. Will we follow the patterns of social behavior and social order that we've inherited and continue to embed them in our physical and digital infrastructures? Or will we build on critical intellectual traditions that have continuously developed insights and strategies grounded in justice? My hope is that we all find ways to build on this tradition. Thank you for your attention.
Wow.
Well done, Ruha.